many of our classrooms, we have teachers that are talking about science. And in our area, especially in western Arkansas, often what they're talking about is only a few foot outside the window. So what we'd like to see teachers do, literally, is turn off those classroom lights, open the door, and take their kids out and show them the real world. It's about 1 mile, something like that at the widest probably. Where we're going, it's just a couple hundred yards across. And most of the mountain itself, as you come up, you notice there's a lot of cliffs, especially in the winter. You'll notice the cliffs. So there's only a few places that you can actually get up on top of the mountain. So the trail, if you came up from Terrace side, was an old buffalo trail. You notice how it goes back and forth, back and forth. The animals will find an opening, and they normally won't go straight up unless there's just absolute necessity. They're going to, take the easier way, and so they backtrack, and you'll see a part of the old trail from that. And there's a lot of buffalo in Arkansas at one time. In fact, the last ones killed out, I think 1867, 8, somewhere there. Saline County had some that were killed. So after the Civil War, there were still buffalo in Arkansas. We don't associate that normally with our area. Those of you from up around Lavaca means the cow, and Batch Grass, which is the creek that runs through there, is fat cow, and they're not referring to cattle, they're referring to buffalo. And so the French traders would come up along the Arkansas River and they'd trade with the Indians. And one of the places that they used for trading goods, supplies and so forth, for especially buffalo hide, was there at Lavaca, right there on the corner of Arbuckle Island, and some of those places real close there. So lots of history in this part of the state. The people that came up here on the magazine actually did not come up here until Civil War time, and even after that until early 1900s. There was just not a lot of population up here, and one of the big reasons is water. There's very little water. This was an old home place, Brown Springs. Most of the water for this area, you have to think of the top of the mountain's a capstone of sandstone, and it's up to over 100 foot width, I think, in some places. And the highest point over here is, we just passed it. You can walk up the trail, go up to the highest point of the mountain. So water will come in, land on top of the mountain when it's raining. It will filter through the sandstone, and then it hits a layer of shale and goes sideways. And where it comes out sideways is our springs. So that's what we're finding along here. And then we go down under the cliff and we find a few more springs. And that's where most of our population were at. Underneath you can see a lot of waterfalls. But I have a picture where they used to back wagons, and they'd back it up and under the bluff, and water was dripping off, and it would fill the barrels. They'd have 50-gallon wooden barrels, and then they would pull out. You can go down there today, and they have where the wagon wheels back in there are ruts that deep still yet, and they're still there. Immediately as you came up on the right was a road that goes off to the west. That's the Mossbark family, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. But there's also a big apple orchard up there, and they used to raise a lot of fruit and so forth on top of the mountain. Directly across from where we're at now was, it's all grown up and everything, but that area was a golf course, 9-hole golf course. And it's hard to believe that they ever had all that up here on top of the mountain. Y'all come on down, because we're off trail now. From now on, you better keep a neighbor in front of you. Yeah, you can go across that anywhere you want to. Okay. Yeah, we've been on a real tame trail. We're now about to hit a real trail. Y'all think I'm joking?
No, I know you're not. Look at all that pretty moss on there.
This is to know how to find my way out. Wasn't worried about whether I fell on in or not, but pretty deep. And I'm just going to show you, there's so many ways, guys, that you can use outdoor classrooms to teach with, and you can teach across the curriculum. For instance, in physics, we taught that all objects drop, and they drop at about 9.8 meters a second. A meter's about 3 foot, right? So if somebody has a stopwatch, I could throw this in and we can hear it hit. Now, it's not pure science because it's going to hit and it slides back, and supposedly where all of y'all are standing, it's open up and under there, from what I've heard in the past. And supposedly is a lot of water down in the bottom. So we can listen to it, and we listen to it fall, and then I'll tell you the other part of the story. Somebody got a stopwatch? Everybody have to be real quiet, and you can hear this drop. Somebody ready, set, go. Stop. Anybody get the timing? That's pretty close. We always get 3 seconds, 3 to 4 seconds. That's about 90 to 100 foot. About 90 to 100 foot down. In 1930s, here again, here's how you can't teach local history without tying into national history, and notice we've even went to international history. In 1930s, what was going on? Depression. Great Depression. Last part is we had World War II start. So we had the Great Depression, and it was hard life, especially up in this area. My grandfather worked for the CCC, placed a lot of the help with all the roads. And when I go to Devil's Den, I always tell the teachers, you see that CCC, they have a big statue. Have y'all been up there? It has a great big statue, and it's a big, strong guy, no shirt on, sitting over there with a hammer. And I said, my grandfather worked for CCC, and they say I look a lot like him, and that's his statue right over there. It might have anything to do with it, but it's a good story. But my grandfather did work for the CCC, and they built a lot of the area up here. This area wasn't really settled extensively till about 1900 before you really saw much population up here. Never saw a lot of population, but before you had very many people. May have been one scattered here and there, but very few people lived up here. By 1887, the railroad came in from Little Rock. The railroad ran from Markham Street, which is where the trolley's at. It comes up to the south side of the mountain, and it goes through Boonville and goes through Magazine. And during that period of time, it became real fashionable for people to take a vacation. And they thought of this mountain as being an ideal place to go. It was fairly close. They could take their family there. They could go after the crop was put in. And the temperature is a lot cooler. It's about 7 to 10 degrees cooler up here than it'll be in Paris. Paris is at 500, a little over, foot elevation. Up here, you're at 2,700 foot elevation. Temperature decreases 3.5 to 5 degrees every 1,000 foot that you go up as an average. So we're quite a bit cooler. Some enterprising people started hotels up here on the top. There were 2 or 3 hotels. Most of them were down in the area of the mountain about where the high point's at and around the cliffs and down in that area. A lot of stories about the different hotels that existed, how big they were, and what went on there. There's one with a swimming pool. Those swimming pool, you can still see the bottom of it. It was not very deep, 3 foot maybe. And the story was that one of the first outdoor bathrooms was advertised by one of the hotels, and it was because there was a part of the hotel that was built over a cliff. It was not a flush toilet, it was a drop toilet literally, but you could go in the restroom and it was built over, it would drop down the side of the cliff. And you can actually, if you come up the trail from Corley, you're going right under the cliff, and you find some old pots and pans and junk that's been dropped over there that's rusted out real well. Several interesting characters that lived on the mountain, to go Garvin Green. One of the people he talked about was Mossbark family. Dad knew Mr. Mossbark was born in Prussia. And at that time they'd be drafted in the military, and you stayed in the military essentially all your life. After you got 18, you were there to be called up for war. So his family got together the money to send him to America so he could avoid the military. So he comes to America. Within just a few years, the Civil War breaks out. Guess what happens? He gets drafted. And he was drafted. He fights during the war, and then he got one of the rewards for fighting during the war was you were allowed some public property, usually like 160 acres. He comes up to Magazine Mountain, settles over just as you come up the top of the mountain, he lived down a little trail there to your right. I've seen pictures of his house and him sitting out there, great big white beard. He's got a wine cellar, and he and his family grew up there. He raised several children. His son, my father knew. So we're not talking that many generations away. Old man Mossbark had came up in this area. Arkansas is known at one time as the bear state. A lot of bear in the area up here even today. And Mr. Mossbark was over here in Bear Gap. And he was hunting, ran across the bear. He shoots the bear goes into a cave. The cave I told you could crawl into if you like. Mr. Mossbark got his rope. He's going to go in there, pull the bear out, and dress it. So he crawls into the cave. He's got a rope. The story is he ties it around the bear's foot, and about halfway through the process, the bear starts snorting or whatever and comes after him. You're going to see it's pretty steep getting out of there. And Mr. Mossbark, I can just imagine, big white beard and that bear biting his butt. And he's crawling out of there. And I would probably be on all fours because you just about have to be to get out. And he takes off down Bear Gap and gets up a tree or on a rock, and the bear turns and goes back in the cave, trailing the rope. So he gets his son. He said, I shot a bear, son, and we got to get him out. He's in there. And so you get up on this rock and you fire. I'm going to pull. And you fire when he comes out. So he pulls on the rope. Bear comes charging out. The son shoots him behind the head. They drag the bear out. The son, they dress it. And his son says, Dad, there is just one hole in this bear. And Dad said, no, I shot him. I know I shot him. The son said, no, Dad, there's just one hole. So they argue it. The old man goes back in the hole, and sure enough, another bear is in there dead. So, you know, like all parents, he comes out and he says, son, I don't want this story to go anywhere. You know, yeah, don't tell your mom. And he said, don't tell anybody. And just like your kids at school say, I will never tell that story. Well, that's, as soon as he got down, you know what happened. And so they said for years he'd go down to Mallard, a little town down here, and the kids would growl at him, you know, and they'd make signs like a bear. And he never did learn to speak English real well. They said he'd cuss at them in German and throw rocks at them. So quite an interesting character. His son also taught school. They elected the school teacher. And I'm glad we don't do that today. But people in the area elected the school teacher, and the story was that his son elected school teacher time after time. They had several children. And one of the other people took exception to him being the school teacher every year, got mad and burned the schoolhouse down. One of the more eccentric stories was Chalmers Ferguson. Chalmers moved up here on top of the mountain early 1900s after he had fought. Well, let's go back to the original part of the story. He was raised in a community where his father had died and his mother had another little girl afterward with no husband. And back then that was really frowned on. So the mother decided that it would be better to take their lives than to live in the life that they had lived. So he was a young boy, his sister was just a baby. She took him out in the middle of a stream and she was going to drown him. And she laid back into the water holding the baby and had him by the hand, and the stream caught him and began to wash him downstream. And a guy rode up on a horse and he was able to save Chalmers and pulled him out, but the other two died, and that affected him all of his life. Later he enlists with Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, and he fights during the Spanish-American War. But obviously he saw a lot of carnage and that kind of thing. So you can see why a person, he's had this bitter childhood. He comes up and then he sees war that he doesn't want a part of, and see all the things that happened there. And he decided he just wanted away from it. All of us probably feel that way every once in a while. He just wanted to be away from it. And he decided the best place was to be right here on Magazine Mountain. He comes in the magazine, and they say he's quite eccentric. He wore a big top hat. He had played in the band, and he had something like a green vest, I believe that's right, some real bright color, and some real oddly dressed. You know, even in Paris and magazine today, he would still been an oddball, but he was really an oddball, 1900. He comes up and he built a little cabin down under the bluff up here, and he's known as the poet of Arkansas. See, I'm a pretty eccentric guy. Every once in a while, when he had to have money, he would go down to magazine, and he worked a little bit as a school teacher. They have the old amphitheater. When the hotels were operating, they had a theater up here, and they'd have traveling groups come through to do Shakespearean plays, and they do those right out on the edge of the bluff. I always take them up to the high point on the mountain, and we get the picture with the highest location in the state of Arkansas. It's also, or at least the highest elevation from ground up. It's the highest mountain between the Appalachians and the Rockies if you're talking about starting at 500 foot and going up in elevation to 2,700 foot. There's high areas. You're going to have higher elevation. You got high plains, which are high elevations. They're not mountains. So that's a good place for kids to go. I have a lot of activities that you can do with kids. We've done all kinds of stuff from teaching them a little bit on compasses, and we do some letterboxing. I have letterboxes hid up here. Letterbox is kind of like GPS units, and it will tell them, you take a compass, you go to the trail where the point to the highest point of the mountain is located. Turn 180 degrees. Well, if they turn 180 degrees, they're going to turn and they'll be facing right up the mountain. And it tells them to proceed south for so many meters, so we're teaching them mathematics. And if they follow the location right, they'll find a box. In that box is an ink pad, an ink pen, and a notepad. And so they get a symbol for themselves, like if they want to be a giraffe or whatever, we'll give that to them. And so little kids will take their symbol and they put it on my ink pad, and they'll open my booklet and they put their symbol on there and they write in the notes. And then they take my pad and put it on theirs. So we try to get a reverse, and there are some of those hidden in various places around our region, and you can hide some in your school grounds. You can have kids look for them. And that's called letterboxing, and it's got better than GPS in that it teaches them. You can teach them rocks, and you teach them tree types, anything you want to put on there. And so you teach them. You do it at your school. So what we'd like to see teachers do, literally, is turn off the classroom lights, open the door, and take their kids out and show them the real world and use the real world as a classroom. It becomes much more meaningful for the kids. They remember much more of what they've gone over. That's the format we used on Magazine Mountain. We actually took the teachers up, and we do students the same way during the year, and we let them experience the outdoors. Part of it is a lecture. They come along and we tell them about the mountain, but a big part of it the kids do hands-on. They can literally crawl through the caves. They can crawl up and down the site where the old amphitheater was at. They walk to the highest point. They climb to the highest point, sit, have their pictures made. We have them looking up hidden boxes using GPS, where they have to know the rock types, they have to know the tree types, they have to know directions, they have to measure in number of feet. So we literally have the kids out experiencing real world education.
Arkansas, Arkansas, I sure love old Arkansas. Love my ma, love my pa, I just love old Arkansas.